We know the agricultural sector is one of the backbones of South Africa's economy, and heading into the polls, stakeholders in the sector have a lot riding on the decisions that will be made by an incoming administration. So let's talk about some of the focal areas that would require attention. And I'm joined by Chief Economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, Wandile Sihlobo, who's also a Senior Fellow at Stellenbosch University's Department of Agricultural Economics and celebrated writer as well. Wandile, thank you very much for being with us and for your time this morning. I'm going to go straight into it. The agricultural sector is one sector that is right now critical for job creation. Explain its importance as a driver for the country's economic growth.
Iman, the sector, as you rightly put it, is very important because if you think about its size in the overall economy in South Africa, when we're looking specifically on primary agriculture, we come up with a figure that is somewhere around about 2.5% as the size of the South African GDP. But when we begin to consider the entire value chain of agriculture, backward and forwards, then we end up with a figure that is somewhere around about 10% of the South African economy. So that's a sizable figure. But the other aspect of its important demand is around employment, because in primary agriculture alone, we have roughly around about 940,000 people that are there, and another figure of just over 400,000 people that are in the processing side of the value chain. So it's also, yet again, an important sector on the economic perspective and as well as on the employment side, which is why in times like this, when we are approaching elections, and of course, in a new administration, the policies that gets to be put in place begin to be very important, because we think that with all of these gains that we have in employment and economy, this is a sector that could still do more and create more jobs and even expand in terms of the areas to be planted and the economic activity in rural South Africa.
And I'm going to circle back to that point. I want to quickly go to this. The sector hasn't been without challenges. We see them. You are one of the people that document some of the challenges and its impact in the short and long term to the economy. You know, it arises from changes in temperature, droughts, flash floods, and so on and so forth. So therefore, stability is also affected. Certainty in how the sector will be managed into the future is critical. And there are some things that you are hoping a new administration will not do, like introduce new policies. Please explain that to our viewers.
In our view, Iman, we think that today in South Africa, we have done a lot of thinking about how South Africa's agriculture should be positioned. I mean, you think back in 2012 when Dr. Trevor Manuel and the colleagues had chaired the development or drafting of the National Development Plan. They came out in Chapter 6 with a view about how to grow South Africa's agriculture. They talked about a possibility of 1 million jobs that the sector could deliver when considering also the value chain. Since then, when they released that report to today, we've seen employment expanding by roughly 22%. Fast forward to 2022, Minister Didiza sat with industry, labor, and other stakeholders to say, okay, let's drill down to Chapter 6 of NDP and come up with a practical plan that we can actually implement. That ended up to the publication in May 2022 of what we call Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan, which in its drafting, Iman, is not a government document or private sector document or labor document. It's really co-created, and many stakeholders do agree with the interventions that it set out on commodity specifics, on regional specifics, on value chains, about what are the challenges that confront us. Why are we not growing faster? Why are we not creating more jobs? And that's really the reflections that we have had. Right now, though, our thinking is that a new administration, when it comes to place, they need not to be going back to the drawing board and coming up with another plan, because this is a sector, it's not an academic exercise. It's really going then to that master plan and saying, why has it not been implemented? It was because of A, B, C. And how do we then ensure that this time around we are implementing it effectively? And it was not implemented because of load shedding, animal diseases, and other things that it disrupted. But I think this time around, the new administration should use that as a fundamental document for developing the sector, in addition to about 10 aspects that we think to us are important. And I will run through them very briefly without explaining. The first one around land reform, releasing some of the land that is on the state hands to animal diseases, very important, because half of our agricultural economy is cattle industry, livestock, and poultry. Agricultural Product Standard Acts that deal with management of quality of agricultural products, exports issues, opening up more export markets, and the other things that are outside agriculture, ports and rail, roads and municipalities, rural crime, water infrastructure. These are aspects, Iman, that I think should be a focus, but no new introduction of policies, but rather to say, how do we drill down and improve on existing already drafted intervention for this? Because most stakeholders agree that what we have implemented effectively can actually deliver growth and job creation.
I think it's a really important point that you make in that separation of this not being a political document or the policy not driven by the politics of the day, but has been the result of that co-conceptualization, co-creation between the stakeholders in the industry, you know, all of the people in that supply and value chain who will be a part of it and who also will contribute to it. So leave it alone. Do not touch it, you're saying, when it comes to the agriculture and agro-processing master plan. It offers a credible framework to grow the agriculture and the agro-processing sector, among others. And it is a big plan, Wandile. I know that you've tried to kind of just hop, skip and jump us through some of the main attributes. But when you talk about the 10 critical areas that would need to provide the supportive framework for the real implementation of the plan and hopefully that key consequence of creating jobs, there's some important ones. I mean, you've touched on land reform, which is always going to be a big one. But the role that roads and municipalities play, you know, it's not directly in the plan, but it's certainly in the supporting environment as well. Rural crime around stock theft and so on. Water, which is going to be a big issue. It's already a big issue, and post-elections will probably become an even bigger one. I'll give you, just a little bit more time to talk about some of these other areas that really we need to pull together as a country, despite who the administration is, to get the country's jobs going and for us to really be the food basket for not only ourselves, but the region.
Absolutely, man. And I think the starting point really has to be also on the land reform, because that is important not only for growing the sector, but ensuring that there is inclusion. Because one of the aspects of South Africa that we have to confront is that you think back to 1994 up until to today. Yes, there's been many challenges over the years, but this is a sector that has seen enormous growth over that period. In the last 3 decades, we have more than doubled in value and in volume terms. We are more food secure now at a national level, the only African country within the top 40 agricultural exporters that is there in the world. There are all of these gains. But then the question comes to say, but the issue of inclusivity. Black farmers still make up about 10% of the commercial output. Then to ensure that that figure increases, on land reform, we need to continue with the policies that I have. Land reform in South Africa is in 3 legs. You have land redistribution, restitution, and tenure. There's been some sense of progress in land acquisition, but I don't think we have been fast enough in releasing that land to Black South Africans with title deeds for commercial production. And of course, there are other things related to housing, but specifically to agriculture for commercial production. The land that has been acquired by the state, I know in various news, we talk about a 9%, 10%, but the figure when you add everything that has been acquired, private transaction, restitution, redistribution, it's somewhere at about 25% of the 30% figure that the ANC had set and now put it up for 2030, which on its own, it's not the end of land reform, but it is an important target. But now within that progress, there is about 2.5 million hectares of land, which for a long time, the government had didn't transfer it to beneficiaries. It is in the past few months where we've seen the transfer happening aggressively. Indeed, even Friday, Minister Tidiza issuing title deeds. The new administration has to transfer that land to beneficiaries, then follow it up with the post-transfer support in terms of finance, which is through the blended finance instrument, and partnerships that organize agriculture could strike with the new beneficiaries so that we build an inclusive agricultural sector. And issues of stock theft and water, those needs to be addressed, because without them, we will not see this inclusive growth that we talk about, which the master plan and the release of this land promises.
So the incoming administration, if it's not the one we already have, would have to certainly do their reading, Wandile, and look at what has already been left in the space, because any changes do have material impact, especially down the road when you think about the growth opportunities in respect of some of these issues that you're talking about. In fact, all of these issues you're talking about right now. Wandile Sihlobo, thank you very much for talking to us this morning. Appreciate your time.